So the net neutrality rules have been overturned. And my goodness, you would think that, honestly, from what I've seen, you would think that the internet caught on fire.
It did catch on fire.
Like California.
Very topical.
Yes, indeed. So yeah, a lot of people are freaking out about this. People are saying, I've heard a lot of things. I've heard, what's the most common one I've heard? So since net neutrality has been turned over, internet service providers, we're going to call those ISPs going forward, because that's what that means anyway. ISPs, your Comcast, your AT&Ts, your and here in this area of the country we also have TDC, there's Cable One, anyone who provides you high-speed internet, your ISPs. People are worried that net neutrality being turned over means that these companies can, instead of sell you a service, sell you packages. So let's say if you just do email and you do a little bit of social media, well, there's a package for that. Or, hey, if you stream video, there's a more expensive package for that. If you use Netflix, YouTube, Hulu a lot. But if you, game online, well, then there's a different package for that at a different price point. So, net neutrality went into place about 2 years ago. It's 2015. Control your stomach, sir.
I know.
Went into place 2 years ago, and on the surface, even the words net neutrality, and by the way, we've talked about this before. It's not a new topic to us. Certainly not a new topic to me, and it's something that I have researched and I've really looked into. A lot of people my age and younger that are just writing about this. There's no kind way to say it. They just don't know what they're talking about. They don't really understand the issue and really what's at stake and why it even got overturned. No one's really looking into that. In fact, I'd like to go through. So yeah, it came into place in 2015, and now everyone's upset because the FCC chairman, I believe his name is Ajit Pai.
I think so. Yes.
Is the one who kind of led the charge to get it repealed. So this is great. This is great. This is how the Kotaku article begins. It's called "FCC votes to overturn net neutrality rules brings us one step closer to a destroyed internet." Oh, I love the hyperbole already. It starts with, today the Federal Communications Commission voted to repeal net neutrality protections in a totally unsurprising move that will, in all likelihood, royally screw the internet as we know it. With net neutrality gutted, browsing the internet could resemble the token 90s experience of waiting for a porn image to load pixel by pixel, unless you pay a premium. I don't know why they went to porn, but that is what they said in Kotaku. Okay. The 90s. Back in the era of dial-up. Okay? No. That is not going to happen. That is an example of fear-mongering. This has only been in place since 2015. I don't know about you, but back in 2014, internet was pretty much the same thing as it is today. Let me go through more of this article, if I can. I'll skip ahead of some of it. Let's see. And by the way, like they even cited some report. 98.5% of people asked about, in a poll said they were opposed to it. I don't care. If you don't know what you're talking about, I really don't care what your opinion is. So I'm going to go ahead and skip by that. Let's see. Sorry, I'm going to... Anyone who manages to watch this video is probably going to be very upset. Because a lot of gamers are against this. And YouTube content creators are against this. And again, they don't understand what they're talking about. Oh, here we go. For gamers, the end of net neutrality could mean that companies charge gaming networks for money. In a 2014 Kotaku article, news editor Jason Schreier warned that the cost could trickle down to consumers. Also, he asked, worse, what if ISPs wind up separated into factions? What if Sony decides to cozy up with Comcast, paying them a pretty penny to ensure that PSN runs smoothly, while Microsoft won't give? Imagine having to pick a new gaming system based on what will run more quickly on your network. This could give a whole new meaning to the term console wars. So before I get into my main point here on that is, you notice a lot of could. That word pops up a lot, like this could happen, this might happen, this may happen. Okay, net neutrality wasn't a thing before 2015. Did this ever happen in the US before then? No, it didn't. So why they're saying, oh, companies could do this, they have no reason to. And also, you want to talk about networks, some networks not running smoothly than others. Flash forward 10 years ago when Microsoft Xbox Live had a huge head start on Sony with its PlayStation network. And if you wanted to play a game online and it was multi-platform, you bought it on Xbox 360 because you were going to get a better, smoother experience rather than on PlayStation 3. That kind of sounds like what he's talking about, right? It's been a thing. Networks have been part of the console wars, period. And it had nothing to do with the ISPs or anything to do with what network was paying what money to that. I will tell you what they are referencing there. There was a time before net neutrality where, and this is actually still the case, and this is the main crux of my argument of why net neutrality sucks. Netflix, big video streaming service online. Yes? Okay. Back a few years ago, they were using a third of the bandwidth. And when I say that, that means that look at a network like Comcast network, look at it as a pipe. Because that's what networks really are. They're not this infinite, huge network that can handle all of the traffic in the world that you want. It just can't. It's a finite system where only so much information can go back and forth. Video takes the most amount of data, period, like by far, especially with high definition. And now you've got 4K streaming. Like it's a monstrous amount of data. And for us to get to the point where we don't have to worry about that, networks have to get upgraded. And they will eventually, because networks have to compete with each other. So back to Netflix. So Netflix was, back then, using about a third of the total bandwidth available to get to the internet. Netflix. Netflix is one of hundreds, if not thousands, of websites and web services. They were using a third of it. So I believe it was Comcast. Comcast approached them and said, hey, your users are using a third of the bandwidth, and it's slowing everything else down, especially during peak hours. Like 5 o'clock, when everyone comes home and gets online to watch something. Those are peak hours. Comcast said, here's the deal. This can't continue because it is stressing our network. But if you pay to have your video in its own dedicated area of this pipeline of the bandwidth, then that'll fix the problem. But we want you to pay for it. Because it's not that they're greedy. Everyone looks at an internet service provider and they're just like, oh, they're just greedy. And by the way, I'm no fan of Comcast. I think their customer service is horrible. But when it comes to them managing their network, they knew what they were doing. Because what they actually did was they turned around, They took that money, they actually reinvested it into their network to be better suited for Netflix and video streaming. And now look at Netflix today. I don't know about you. How long have you been using Netflix for?
A long time.
I've been using Netflix for a long time too. Probably like since 2010. Ever since the app was, I want to say, during one of the PlayStation 3 system updates, they gave you the app. And I think I started using it then, when it was $7.99.
I think I've been using it since 2012.
Okay. I don't know about your experience, but my experience was when it didn't matter how good your internet was, there were certain times of the day, if you wanted to watch something, it might have taken 10 seconds to buffer, and you wouldn't get like the highest quality of the video, like it'd be a little bit blurry, a little bit fuzzy, and then eventually it would catch up and you were good to go. There were some days where you couldn't watch it at all. Guess what wasn't a thing when that happened?
Net neutrality.
Net neutrality, right. Guess what got fixed before net neutrality was even a concept? That did. Due to that Comcast deal, I would say, I don't have proof of it, but the quality of Netflix is... there's no buffering now when I got onto it. That's not because of net neutrality, because that happened beforehand. So that deal was working. That's why companies like Netflix, like Google, like Facebook are okay. They love net neutrality because it makes it so that the ISPs can't say like, hey, we need you to help pay for your services. And it's not like Netflix was paying for any, they didn't build the networks. That's another point I'll get back to later. But it was like they weren't really paying their fair share. All they were doing was they were getting licenses to these movies and TV shows, dumping them online, and then charging people to access them using their own internet service. So Netflix was rolling high on the hog when it came to money. So yeah, they could help a little bit improving their own customers' experience. So there's that point. Let me see what else is in this article. Let's see. So in the this is just kind of the end of the article, and it gets just overtly political here. In the past, Pai and other anti-net neutrality congressmen argued that internet regulations will give service providers less incentive to compete and improve. Sure, that sounds like a crock of baloney, censored that, when paired with the fact that tens of millions of U.S. homes can only get internet with speeds over 25 megabits per second from one company. Oh my goodness, the darling things. I have no idea what they'll be able to do. He continues, and that cable companies have donated millions of dollars to hundreds of Republican politicians in the most recent election cycle. Number one, I don't care who you're donating to. Okay? Let's just get that straight. Also, there's only one company. Yes, there are some markets where, like Mississippi, I want to say Mississippi, pretty much the whole state, you can only get high-speed internet from one company, and that's Cable One. They have what's called a monopoly. Part of the problem here, and by the way, we live in Nashville. For the last couple of years, Google Fiber has been trying to come into Nashville. The reason why they can't is because Comcast owns the utility poles that Google Fiber would have to use to install their lines, to get their service installed. And Comcast is saying, no, you can't use our utility poles because We own them. It's a more complicated issue than simply one company not wanting to compete with another, because there's a little thing called the government that stops a whole bunch of utility poles from going up. Why? Environmental reasons. Reasons like it's ugly. You don't want so many utility poles up and running. The government doesn't want to put up utility poles for some reason. All kinds of reasons. But it's all regulated by government saying you can't have too many utility poles. If you want to see a place where that's not a problem and they've got utility poles all over the place and it does look ugly, look at, places like Mumbai and Hyderabad, like those very rapidly developing countries over in Asia that are just regulatory free. It has its pros and cons because you have those ugly things, but something like Google Fiber coming in, not a problem because they can just like, okay, we're just going to put our utility pole next to yours. But then again, it's ugly. There's a couple different ways to solve that. Here's the deal. When it comes to net neutrality had nothing to do with that. Net neutrality doesn't do anything as far as increase competition. It's kind of a different issue. That's a different problem. The only thing that net neutrality really did was it stopped companies from saying, okay, Netflix, you have video service, YouTube, you have video service, we're going to give you a faster connection because you're video and you need it. Reddit, Twitter, you're mostly text, so we're going to actually give you a slower speed. That way, they're not getting the same amount. It's kind of like, let's say you've got a pipe where there's 100% bandwidth, but you have 10 companies fighting over that. Underneath net neutrality, they would all get 10%. Netflix would get 10% of the bandwidth when it really needs something more like 45. Then you have Reddit, which really can function with 3% of the bandwidth, but no, it gets 10. Why? Because net neutrality. Why? Because that's what's fair. Do you see the problem with that? Networks the ISPs are not allowed to optimize their network. And that's kind of the last point I want to close on with this. What net neutrality did, aside from that, is it gave control of these networks to the federal government, which did not build these networks. These networks were built by Comcast. Love them or hate them, they built a network which provides internet to people. Same thing with AT&T, same thing with Time Warner, you name it, they built the network. They own it. Call me old-fashioned. I think if you build something, you have the right to say what happens to it or not. Can they possibly take that and say, go this whole package route thing? And by the way, I don't think I mentioned this. The whole thing about the packages, like, oh, if you want the social media package, it's this much. Or if you want the video streaming package, it's this much. We already do that with internet costs and speeds. We have different speed packages, do we not? For like $20, you get like 25 down. For $40, you get 50 down. Talking about, download speeds. The tiers of service have existed since the beginning of the internet. So why is everyone whining about this? And also net neutrality didn't do away with those. They still hung around when those rules were in effect. So, in retrospect, net neutrality, it's not exactly what it sounds like. You have to dig deeper. Internet service providers have pretty much always tiered their services. I don't know what they were getting at when it came to, oh, you might have a different network experience depending on what gaming platform. Yeah, duh, it's been like that. ever since online gaming was a thing. And lastly, these companies purchased materials to build their own networks. They should be allowed to do whatever they want with it. If there comes a day where AT&T says, you know, we don't like this website over here bashing us, you know, Reddit, whatever example you want to use. We don't like what they're saying about us. We're going to slow them down, or we're just going to altogether block them. Do you know what happens at that point? That's what you call blood in the water in the business world, because all of a sudden, AT&T is not going to give that to you. This happens, by the way, with cable companies and satellite. When satellite stopped, giving customers local channels, cable companies took advantage of that. They're like, don't worry, we've got your local channels right here. Sign up with us. That's an example of competition. So if AT&T were to cancel out a website or a few websites, but the other companies aren't, guess what's going to happen to AT&T? They're going to lose all these customers. Because they're going to be like, oh, you're limiting my internet? Okay, bye. Customers tend to not like that when there's better choices to go around. One thing I did forget to mention, and this is actually personally affects me because I recently changed phone carriers. I don't know about, I don't know how long you've had a cell phone for, but there was a time back in, I want to say, late 2000s, before 2010, where there were unlimited data plans on Verizon, AT&T, the Sprint. They all had them. Then they all went away for a few years. The cause of that, again, this is my opinion. I'm not citing anything here, but I believe the cause of that was because there were a lot of people that got cell phones or smartphones right away. I want to say between like 2007 and 2012, it went from under 10% to 50% of all people on the planet having smartphones. So the networks were like, we can't do this. We can't offer unlimited data. Our network cannot support this. So it went away for a few years. Guess what's back?
Unlimited data.
Unlimited data. And net neutrality has no effect over that. That didn't affect mobile data or anything like that. It strictly was ISPs for home. The moral of the story is that if you leave companies alone, for the most part, they just get better. They don't get worse. When they start to get greedy, they start to fail. You just let them do what they'll do, and things will get better one way or another. You don't have to involve the government in it. You don't have to get it regulated. We're not going to go back to 90s dial-up. That's probably been the worst thing that I've heard so far. Like, you have to be kidding. If you actually believe that, please do some research. So, Matt, do you feel like you have a more clear understanding of what net neutrality is and isn't?
I do. Mostly because all I heard about from all the... I haven't looked anything up about it. I just heard from... What was it? I think I actually saw it in a newspaper first.
Wouldn't surprise me.
Because my work is fairly old-fashioned. They still get papers, and they let people read them, and occasionally we'll read them just because
they get newspapers because net neutrality's gone now, and the internet's gone.
Exactly. We don't even use our computers anymore. They're just paperweights.
We just use them for voice, text to voice.
Oh gosh.
Have all kinds of fun with that.
Yeah. And then also on YouTube, a bunch of people started making videos.
Yeah.
About it. And then I hadn't really looked into it, and seeing as how those were my only forms of my only ways of being informed, I was just like, oh, okay. But I never really like argued about it to people. I was just like,
well, because
is.
I feel like on YouTube and online on the tech blogs and everything, there's only the one opinion, and it's a very shallow, not very. It just seems, and I think Kotaku, the whole reason why they were using the language that they were using is because, well, we have to blow this thing even further out of proportion than everyone else's. That's how we get clicks. Clickbait. And YouTube content creators, like, you don't have to worry about this. Like, you're not going to have the ability to stream internet taken away from you, or the ability to upload and have people view your videos. Like, that's not going to go away. Like, it's just going to go back to where the government's not mandating, no, you actually can't optimize your network, ISPs. Why? Because we say so. Because it has to be fair. When you make everything fair, it tends to suck. It just goes that way. It goes to the lowest common denominator. That's true whenever it comes to economics and internet. I can't even think of anything else. I could just think of economics and internet right now. But yeah, if you have a difference of opinion, or if you agree with this, please comment below, like, dislike, do all that stuff. I'm probably one of the only people on YouTube that thinks that net neutrality going away is one of the best things for the internet ever. So let me know.